Greetings, Commanders. Today I'll be teaching you how to play Star Wars Armada, the new tabletop game by Fantasy Flight Games that mimics a lot of war games that you might be familiar with, like Warhammer 40k, War Machines, Infinity Crisis, etc. So the first thing we need to do in order to play this game is first set up our fleets. Now, I'll describe how to set up fleets in a future video, so right now I'll just be assuming that you have already created a 300-point fleet, as well as your opponent will also have a 300-point fleet. So, once you and your opponent have agreed to play, you will of course set up the play area. Now, this game requires a 6x4 layout. It will also require you to set up a interior area that's actually going to be 4x3. Wait, 6x4, excuse me. 6x3. 6x4 is for other tabletop games. And then the interior setup will be 4x3. And the way that you would set up the interior area, if you had, for example, a perfect 6x4 table, you would simply take the range ruler that it comes with, put it along the side, put these handy little markers here, and you could simply set up the interior by going up to the number 3 marker. And then you would place the marker there. And that's how I have this set up. Of course, if you don't have a perfect table, of course this pool table isn't perfect as well, then however you set up the boundaries is up to you. Use tape, use anything, whatever. And then, once you and your opponent have set up this interior setup here, you would decide who will have initiative. The way that you do that is by first determining who has the fleet with the lowest cost. Since the maximum currently is 300, whoever has less than 300 would typically be able to then decide who has initiative. In this example, the Rebel players has a fleet of 296 or 97, I believe, and so they can get to decide who goes first. This is a very important tactical decision when it comes to this game, because who goes first determines everything. It determines who goes first in every single phase of the game, and it determines what happens, and it determines whose missions get picked. And that's something that I won't go over in this series, but I will mention it during the fleet building segment. So for now, let's just say that the Rebel player decides that the Rebel player will have initiative. So they'll take this token and place it close to them wherever. So that means the Rebel player will be the first player, and the Imperial player will be the second player. Normally, once you determine who has initiative, you would then pick the objective. What would happen would be that the first player, which in this case would be the Rebel player, would look at the Imperial player's objectives. What I mean by this is when you build your fleet of 300 points, you're not only just building that fleet, but selecting 3 objectives to kind of go alongside your fleet, which, might be to your advantage in some way, shape, or form. So the first player then picks the second player's 3 objectives, one of them. Normally, I'll just go over real quick. When you build your objectives that go with your fleet, you pick one of each color. So then the first player will look at them and say, okay, let's do this one. And then you would then set up whatever the objective says to set up here. I like this game because it's not just an all-out shootout against you and your opponent. It's also, because of these objective cards, has an element of strategy and depth. But let's forget this for now. We're just trying to learn how to play. So, once you would determine whose objective you're taking and which objective you picked, you would then set up these obstacles. And then starting with the second player, which in this case would be the Imperials, they would be able to place these obstacles within the setup area. So remember, the setup area was 4x3 instead of using the entire area of 6x3. So that means the outer edges of your play field will not have anything in them. And of course, these cannot be placed in the deployment zones unless otherwise specified by the mission card. So let's just go real quick. Say second player decides to put it there. First player decides to put this there. Second player here, there, here, there. And there are rules that these can't be placed within certain distances of each other, usually within 1. So just make sure that everything's coinciding, and that's great. After you've placed all your obstacles, you will then deploy ships, taking turns. So during your turn, so we're starting with the first player, they would now be able to decide to deploy which of their ships first. So let's say the rebel player here wants to deploy their ship in any orientation they'd like, as such. And of course, when you deploy your ship, make sure you have all of its shields set to its proper values, and it's at this point that you will decide at what speed they are entering the game in. And of course, their speed cannot be greater than what's capable on their card. And then once the first player has deployed a single ship, the second player can then place one of their ships, of course, within their deployment zone. So the Imperial player will then place themselves as such, and again pick their speed for that ship. Now, once you have deployed a ship, you now have the option of deploying squadrons, which are the smaller fighter squadrons that you would normally play with X-Wing. Armada is more about the larger capital ships, and squadrons are not as big of a threat, but they still can be quite menacing. So once you've deployed a ship, you now have the option of deploying squadrons up to 2, or you have to deploy 2 if you can, and they can be deployed within the range of 1 to 2. And these squadrons can be outside of your initial deployment zone. So for example, I could say, alright, I'll deploy this squadron out here and a second squadron out here. And that is my deployment turn. And then your opponent would then go again. And they don't have to deploy squadrons. They could deploy another ship if they'd like. And then you go back and forth until everything is completely deployed. If someone, say, happens to finish their entire deployment first, then their opponent would simply deploy everything until they were done as well. An important exception to note is that when it's your turn to deploy something and you only have 1 squadron left, you're not allowed to deploy it until you've deployed all of your ships. So in the example, the rebel player here has a single X-Fighter left and a ship. They can't deploy this single X-Fighter until they deploy their remaining ship. And then in our subsequent turn, we can then deploy this X-Wing. And remember, each time you deploy a ship, you're setting their speed dial. And there you go. Once you have finished deploying all your ships, you are then ready to begin playing. Simply clean up the setup deployment markers, and now you're ready. Armada is played over 4 phases: the command phase, the ship phase, the squadron phase, and the status phase. At the very beginning of the game, during the command phase, each player will set their command dials of each of their ships. What I mean by this is that each ship has a command value located on their card. In this example, the Victory Class 2 Star Destroyer here has a command value of 3. So I will have 3 command dials for that ship. So at the very beginning of the game, I will have to set each and every single one of these dials in however way I'd like before I'm ready to begin. And you'd simply stack them one on top of another, with the stack on top being the one that's going to happen first. So in subsequent turns or subsequent rounds during the command phase, you will have to refresh the stack so that there are the maximum number of command dials that you can have. So for my Victory class, I need 3 command dials here. So which means I'll take the dial that I put on the card and pick a new command, let's just say, and then I'll place this at the bottom of the stack, just like that. So you have to really plan ahead for which commands you want to show up when. So when you start the game, you'll have to plan for turn 1 for round 1, 2, and 3. And then of course you'll spend it, do whatever, and then in the next phase you'll have to plan where you're going to be in 3 rounds. So you just simply select what you think you'll be or what you'll need and place it at the bottom. But that's how the command phase works in subsequent command phase. So remember, during the very beginning of the game, you'll set all 3 or the maximum value of your command dials, and then in subsequent turns you'll select a new command and place it on the bottom. This is the whole sort of gimmick and mechanic to Armada. Something very important to keep in mind of. So once every player has set their command stacks for the very beginning of the game, it is now time to do the ship phase. So during the ship phase, the player with the initiative token will pick one of their ships to activate. To do so, you'll simply pick a ship, take their command stack, and reveal the top command. Now when you reveal a command, you have to decide then and there if you want to turn this command into a token. Now here's where things get a little complicated. So let's talk about commands. Again, once the ship phase has happened, we will reveal the top dial from our stack, and it'll be one of 4 commands. It can be engineering, navigation, squadron, or concentrate fire. So once we reveal our command dial here, we have to decide what we want to do with it, whether we want to turn it into a token or not specifically. When you turn a command into a token, you will get a small token to put aside your ship to remind yourself that you have it. Token effects are less potent than the dial effects. However, you must decide once you reveal the dial whether or not you want to turn it into a token. The reason being is if for some reason, let's say for example you pick squadron and there are no squadrons near you. So it wouldn't be useful to have the dial, but you can save it as a token for subsequent rounds. However, the dial can only be used during the round you reveal it. So if you want to save it for later and have a less potent effect, you might want to take a token. Now let's talk a little bit in depth about what each command does. Navigation. It allows you to change your speed by 1 and temporarily increase your yaw value by 1. Yaw being how many times you can take this fancy movement ruler, how many times you can click the peg side to side. And of course, increasing your speed means you go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, etc. However, if you take the command, or if you take the navigation token, you'll only be able to change your speed by 1. You wouldn't have the bonus benefit of being able to move the yaw an extra value. So the squadron command will let you activate a number of squadrons from close to medium range equal to your squadron value. So each ship has a squadron value. However, the token effect of squadron would only let you do that to 1. So when you activate a squadron using the squadron command, those squadrons that you activate, 1, activate out of turn, because normally squadrons can only activate during the squadron phase. But this allows you to do it during the ship phase. And these squadrons that you activate in this manner can move and attack, whereas normally they'd only be able to move or attack. Next command you can reveal is engineering, which will give you a number of points equal to your engineering value, also found on your card. You can then spend those engineering points to resolve various effects, such as moving shields around your ship, recovering shields, or even recovering damage. However, the token effect will only give you engineering points equal to half your engineering value, rounded up. The next command you can reveal is Concentrate Fire. Concentrate Fire allows you to add 1 dice of any color that is already in your pool. We'll talk about this when we refer to the attack phase of the ship phase. However, the token effect only lets you reroll 1 dice. An interesting thing to note about Concentrate Fire is that, or actually all of these commands, when you decide to keep the dial, it means that you're sort of saving this dial to use for when you use that command. And these commands happen at specific points during each phase, or specifically during the ship phase. So navigation happens during the navigation phase of the ship phase. You can't necessarily spend these tokens or commands out of order or not during the phase in which they're being used. This is important to note because your ship can only have a number of tokens equal to your command value, aka your command stack. So in this example, this Mark II frigate can only have a maximum of 3 tokens. If it were to ever gain another token, it would either have to discard a token or not be allowed to gain that 4th token. And it's also not allowed to gain 2 tokens of the same type. So for example, if we reveal engineering again here and we decide, oh, I want to take the token so I can have 2 engineering, that's not allowed. So once you reveal your command dial, you have to decide then and there whether or not you want to turn it into a token. If you don't, you will then keep the dial and keep it beside next to your ship for when it's ready to use it. So during the reveal dial step of the ship phase, if you have, say, a squadron token from prior or an engineering token from prior, is at this point you can then decide to use those tokens and or dial effects. So in this example, let's say I had an engineering token. Once I revealed the engineering command, actually it's called the repair command, but because it gives you engineering points, I simply refer to it as engineering. If I were to have this from a previous turn and reveal the engineering command, it is at this point I can decide, alright, I want to resolve my entire repair step. So I will gain points equal to my engineering value plus points equal to half my engineering value. I can use a dial and a token together and it count as 1 resolution of the command, which is important because you can only resolve a command once during a round, meaning I cannot resolve repair twice, or I cannot resolve navigation twice, or squadron twice, or concentrate fire twice. You can only resolve it once. You can resolve each once, but you can only resolve each one once. But if I use the dial and the token together, that counts as 1 resolution of that command. But in this example, my Mark II will simply take the command token and not use its dial effects. So I'll put this token by my ship and then put this resolved command dial on top of my ship's card to show that I have activated this ship. Once I have revealed my ship's command dial and decided what to do with it from there, I will then be able to attack. Now, here's the range ruler for ships, but as you can see, there's clearly nothing within range. However, I'll describe how ship attacks work. Let's say, for example, the scenario was more like this. So during the attack step of the ship phase, I'd be able to declare one of my hull zones, one being forward, right, left, rear, and attack one of my opponent's hull zones, forward, right, left, or rear. The way that we determine whether or not I'm even allowed to is by checking line of sight. Line of sight is determined from this yellow dot that's in each of the hull zones, and try and measure a straight line to the opponent's yellow dot on their hull zones. And if there's any sort of obstruction if there's anything interceding between yellow to yellow dot, that's how you determine whether or not you have line of sight. Now, if I were to try to shoot, let's say, from my front hull zone here to my opponent's rear hull zone, again, I'd have to check yellow to yellow dot. However, you may not be able to see it here, but here you can see that this straight line intercedes this green line here on my opponent's ship, meaning that I am not allowed to shoot from my front hull zone to their rear, because the side arc here is blocking my line of sight. So, once I determine whether or not I have line of sight, it's then time to determine range. So if I were to shoot from my front hull zone here, I am allowed to shoot at their front hull zone, because again, from yellow to yellow dot, there's nothing interceding. And then I would check range. And I do that from not yellow to yellow dot, but from my closest part of my base, from my arc, to their closest part of my opponent's base. Now it's also very handy if you have, say, like a laser pointer that will let you measure this out exactly, just to make sure that you have proper arc onto their hull zone. Because as you can see from here, even though it's not a perfect alignment, my front arc doesn't even touch, or doesn't have their front arc in that line. So I can't actually make my front arc to their front arc. So I will instead have to shoot my front arc to their side arc. So if I'm checking from closest to closest here, I can find that I am within medium range, because their base is within the medium line here. So what this range ruler means is close, medium, and long range. At close range, you are allowed to use all the colors as depicted there in your dice pool. At medium range, you can only use blue and red dice, and at long range, you can only use red dice. So, here, my front arc says that it has an armament of 2 red dice. And since I'm within medium range, I'm allowed to use red dice. So I would take my 2 red dice and any other specially added dice, such as from Concentrate Fire or any upgrade cards I might have, and then I would roll them. Now here I got blanks, but let's see what each of these symbols mean. These symbols mean hits. That would obviously mean 2 hits. That is a critical, and this is an accuracy. So if I rolled an accuracy, and let's just pretend a hit, I will then have to decide what to use this accuracy on. Accuracy allows me to negate one of my opponent's defense tokens. In this game, your opponent does not roll dice to defend against your attack like they would in X-Wing. Instead, the attacker will simply roll their dice, and from there decide, and the defender will there decide what to do to act against it with their defense tokens. So in Armada, there are 4 types of defense tokens: Brace, Redirect, Dodge, and Scatter. And they each have different effects. So when you're being attacked, instead of rolling defense dice, you will be able to decide what you can do with the defense tokens your ship has available. Each ship has different defense tokens available to them. So when you're attacked, you decide if you would like to spend your defense tokens. Let's say, for example, when the Mark II attacked the Victory class Star Destroyer, let's say the result was this, just as an example. Well, first off, because they got an accuracy, they'd be able to spend this accuracy to completely nullify one of the opponent's defense tokens. So let's say if this were the 3 defense tokens available to the Victory class, although it's not, the attacker could say, okay, you are not allowed to use this redirect at all during this attack. And then the defender would have to pick from the remaining 2 what they would like to do. If you rolled multiple accuracies, you'd be able to cancel out multiple defense tokens. So what does each defense token do? Brace here will round the total number of hits your opponent rolled down to half, rounded up. So in this example, the attacker rolled 3 hits. This is a critical, which also counts as a hit. So in total, we have 3 hits. If we were to use brace, that would cut it in half, rounded up. So it means that they would only be suffering 2 hits. Not great, but it's still something to consider. And if you ever spend a defense token, you will then flip it to its exhausted state. Dodge does different things at different ranges. At long range, they can cancel 1 dice out entirely. So in this example, if it wasn't canceled out by an accuracy, they'd be able to say, okay, I'm going to spend my dodge and just take this dice out entirely. So I'm only taking 1 hit. That's also a critical. At medium range, you can tell your opponent to re-roll one of the dice that they've rolled. And then at close range, evade does nothing. So trying to use that token at close range would give you no benefit. Redirect will allow you to redirect the damage to a different hull zone that's adjacent to the one that's being attacked. So for example, I could say, alright, if I'm taking 3 hits to my side, I'm going to redirect, let's say I'm going to redirect 1 hit to my rear arc instead. So I will then suffer 1 hit to the rear and 2 hits to the side. And that is how I decide to distribute that damage you're dealing to me with this dice roll. And then squadrons will only have the scatter command. And if you're so lucky to have a squadron that has the scatter dice or the scatter defense token, they can simply cancel all attacks and say, you did not even hit me. Now you're allowed, when you're defending, to resolve multiple defense tokens here. However, you can only resolve each token once, but you can't resolve the same token twice. Now, let's say you survived the attack. This attack did whatever it did to you, and now you got attacked again. They'd roll and they'd decide, alright, I rolled 2 crits. And you then think to yourself, okay, I want to use brace again, even though it's exhausted. You are allowed to do that, but if you do, you have now lost that token entirely for the rest of the game. Because normally, at the very end of the round, during the status phase, you would refresh all of your defense tokens. But if you spend an exhausted token, it'll never come back. And that's how defense tokens work. So you count up how many hits you have here. The defender decides what to do with the tokens, and then you would take the damage. So here I have 1 damage that's now being redirected to the rear. And the Star Destroyer here on its rear shields has only 1, but so we're going to take this dial here and simply slide it over to 0 because it is taking 1 hit. So that's 1 successful attack completed from this Mark II here. So during the attack phase, ships are actually allowed to attack twice. However, they must be from different hull zones. So we've already done an attack out of the front arc here, so we can't choose that again. So we can do an attack from the side arc here. So again, we determine if you're allowed to from determining yellow to yellow dot. Alright, nothing intercedes that. And are you within my arc? And you most definitely are. As you can see, this line goes outwards in this direction, so we can now clip from there. So then we determine the range. As you can see here, from my plastic to their cardboard and their plastic, I'm actually within medium range because it's still within the arc. Just because I determined whether or not I had line of sight, I can't do something like this that's outside of my right arc. I have to actually stay within my arc and measure out to the opposing hull zone. So here I'm within medium range, and my side arc has a battery armament of 3 red dice and 1 blue dice. And actually, in this example, I have an extra dice because I've upgraded my ship, giving the side arcs, the left and right side arcs, an extra red dice for their armament values. So I would simply roll this and tally up. So here I've got 3 dice, 3 hits. And again, the defender would be able to decide what to do with that, with their defense tokens. So he could say, alright, I want to use my brace, therefore turning that into 2 hits, and then I'll use my redirect, and that'll then, I'll redirect them to my arc over here, because it's adjacent to the one that's being attacked. So I'll take 2 hits to the side, reducing those shields down to 1, and then I'll take nothing on the front, because I've reduced this to 2, and redirected those 2 to this side. So let's show you how critical effects work. Here I have the Corvette B attacking the Victory class Star Destroyer here. Again, we'll determine line of sight from yellow to yellow dot. There's nothing interceding, and the range is medium range. So his forward battery armament is 3 blue dice. So we'll simply roll, and here I got 2 hits and a crit. So again, the defender can decide what they want to do with their defense tokens. Now let's say he redirects and braces and whatever. So once we are ready to resolve the damage, which happens after you determine what to do with defense tokens, you can then resolve critical effects. Critical effects here can be things that are on your card, on your upgrade cards, or that can be the standard critical effect. Let's say the defender here had 0 shields on the side and they had no defense tokens to spend. This means that they would take 3 hits, and you could resolve the critical effect saying that the first damage card you take will be face up. So we'll simply take our shuffle damage deck here and give them 1 face up card and then 2 face down cards. But let's say that wasn't the case. Here we have Dodonna's Pride. It's a title card that I've given to this Corvette. And what this card says is that when I'm ready to resolve critical effects, I can use a blue critical to instead cancel all attack dice and instead deal 1 face-up damage card to the defender. This happens after the opponent uses their defense tokens. So let's say he decided, oh, I want to brace, or I want to redirect so that I can still survive this hit. And then you can say, no. I'm going to resolve my critical effect here and instead cancel all of this. That's not even important anymore. And I'll instead give you 1 face-up. Now, luckily, this means that, the Victory class here does not actually take those 2 hits to the front that they had tried to redirect, but it did mean that they spent their redirect tokens. So they will instead just simply take a face-up damage card in this example, because I'm using this Corvette that has Dodonna's Pride on it, which lets me resolve that critical effect. There are other cards that let you resolve critical effects. For example, there is a Assault Concussion Missile, which says that you can spend a black critical to hit each adjacent hull zone for 1 damage. So if in the attack afterwards, this Star Destroyer were to attack this little Corvette, and it would roll, let's just say for fairness sake, 2 hits and a crit. It would mean that it would take 3 hits to the front, and let's say the Corvette does not spend any defense tokens. It means that it would take 3 hits to the front, so 1, 2, the shields are down, and it will take a face down card, and then you were resolving the critical effect to then deal 1 damage to the adjacent sides. So 1, 1. Now when you're resolving critical effects, you can only resolve 1 critical effect, not multiple. So in this example, I could have either done the assault concussion missile effect or simply done the regular critical effect and instead have the first card that you were dealt be face up. But that's your decision to make. When you're attacking another ship, that is when you are allowed to use your concentrate fire command, dial, or token. Now the rules on this are kind of particular. So the concentrate fire dial lets you add a dice that is in the pool against your defender. So for example, this attack was happening at long range here. Here we have the Star Destroyer who wants to attack this Tantif, or this Corvette rather. As you can see by the range, it's a long range attack. Now, this Victory class Star Destroyer's armament is 1 black dice and 2 red dice. But because I'm attacking at long range, I'm not allowed to use black dice. And Concentrate Fire lets me add a dice that is already in the pool. So I've just gathered my pool by seeing my range and subtracting from my armament. So that means if I wanted to use the dial effect, I could only add another red dice. Now there are effects and upgrade cards that let you add dice after you've already generated your pool, such as the Victory class title Dominator that says when attacking at close to medium range you can spend 2 shields to add 2 blue dice. However, in this example I can't use that effect because I'm attacking at long range. I have to be at close to medium range. But let's say I was at close to medium range. Alright, so then I can use its effects and add 2 blue dice to the pool here. And if I wanted to use Concentrate Fire, I now have the option of adding either a blue dice or a red dice. So that's how you generate the pool. And then you would simply roll, decide what happens, and since I rolled 2 accuracies, I can cancel out 2 of your defense tokens, and now you have to decide how you want to take this 2 hits. So that's how the dial works. You have to add a dice that's already in your pool. However, you can only do it during one of your attacks. Because ships are allowed to attack twice, you have to make the decision of whether or not you want to use it on which attack. However, you can make that decision after the fact. So let's say I roll my dice here and I decide, oh, this is a good opportunity for me to use Concentrate Fire and add another dice because I want to just bank on it. Oh no, I rolled a blank. If you happen to have the dial and the token, because remember the rule that you can't resolve a command twice during the same round, but you're allowed to use tokens and dials in conjunction, that means that you have to use this token during the attack in which you're spending the dial or using the dial. So you can't make an attack, add a dice with the dial, resolve it, and then do another attack and then use your token. You have to use the token on the same attack that you're using this dial, which is good in this example because I rolled a blank. So you'd simply re-roll that, and there you go. You resolve, decide what you want to do, etc., etc., resolve it. That's how Concentrate Fire works during the attack phase. And this is the only time in which it gets resolved. Ships are allowed to make attacks on squadrons. However, the way that they attack squadrons is different from when they attack ships. So each ship has an anti-squadron value, which is different from their armament values that are located on their hull zones. The anti-squadron value works for all of their hull zones. However, it's significantly less powerful than their battery armaments. But the way that you'd use it is that you would check, of course, for range. And here, these squadrons, at least the first 3, are within my medium range, which means I'm allowed to use blue dice. And blue dice just so happens to be what my anti-squadron value is. However, this Victory class Star Destroyer's anti-squadron value is only 1 blue dice. That's not very good. However, it's still allowed to use all the benefits of upgrade cards and such and so forth, as long as they enhance either their pull or their anti-squadron value. For example, enhanced armaments specifically says that it upgrades the battery armaments of the left and right arc. However, the title Dominator simply says that it adds blue dice to your attack pool. It does not refer to your battery armaments. So you could, in theory, add 2 more blue dice to this pool and use Concentrate Fire dial to add another blue dice. The reason why this is important is because when you make a squadron attack or an anti-squadron attack, you are allowed to attack every squadron that is within range within the arc of which you're firing from. So that's important because these 3 squadrons here are all within my medium range. So if I use Dominator and add another dice from Concentrate Fire along with my anti-squadron, I'm allowed to attack each of these squadrons once. So you'd simply make your attacks and go as such. Now, the interesting thing is crits do nothing to squadrons. You cannot resolve critical effects, and they don't even suffer damage from critical icons. So if I were to roll this here, 1 critical, 2 hits, and an accuracy, I could spend the accuracy if I was targeting a squadron that had defense tokens to spend accuracy on, but if I'm attacking a generic squadron, this means nothing. And critical icons mean nothing. They're not damages, they can't resolve effects on them, they mean nothing. So that means that I'm only hitting for 2 damage. And of course, when you attack a squadron here, they have small little dials that have their hit points located on them. So if I were to do 2 damage, I would simply move this dial to represent how many hits they took and how much health they have remaining. But once I've finished resolving 1 attack, I am allowed to attack another squadron that is within my arc, within my range. So I'd simply roll again until they were all resolved. And that's how you resolve a ship to squadron attack. And of course, remember, you're allowed to attack twice, but you can't attack out of the same hole. So I would have to make an attack against other ships or squadrons from different arcs. And these 2 squadrons here were out of range. And I can't attack this ship even though it's within my range at long range because I've already shot out of my forward arc. You either shoot at the squadrons or you shoot at the ships. It's up to you. So I mentioned obstructing shots. Obstruction is when something intercedes between your yellow dot to an opponent's yellow dot. So in this example here, we have this debris field that is clearly in between the yellow dots between this Corvette and this Star Destroyer. So when something is obstructing that shot, it can be either an obstacle like a debris field, an obstacle field, or whatever, or it can be another ship. So when your attack is obstructed, you lose 1 dice that is in your pool. So normally this Corvette here would have 3 blue dice in its forward battery arc, but because the attack is obstructed, it'll lose 1. However, when you lose 1 dice, you're allowed to pick 1 dice of your choice. If, for example, this Corvette had a red dice in this pool, I could say, okay, well, since the attack is obstructed, I will instead choose to lose this blue dice, and that'll be my remaining pool. If, for example, the ships were more lined up like this, I would trace line of sight from yellow to yellow dot, and let's just say that there was no obstruction here, and then I would gather my pool, right? However, when determining range, from closest to closest point, let's just pretend it was something like this, where it's much closer, and now I'm within close range. But from my closest point to their closest point, you would think, oh, well, clearly that's obstructed, right? Well, no. obstruction only matters from yellow dot to yellow dot, and if there's nothing in between that, the attack is not considered obstructed. So you would get your full pool. Now, as I mentioned, ships can obstruct shots to other ships. Squadrons do not obstruct line of sight shots to and from ships. For example, if we had a little squadron here, that wouldn't matter to the ships. However, squadrons can still have their line of sight obstructed by obstacles in other ships. So if this ship, or this squadron here, was able to attack this ship here, because its line of sight clearly goes through an obstacle, it would lose one of its dice in its pool. But we'll talk more about squadrons during the squadron phase, and that's how you resolve the attack phase.